The eggs were perfect. That was the first thing Mara noticed every morning. Not the light through the kitchen curtains, not the smell of dark roast coffee, but the eggs. Always perfectly done. Whites firm, yolks liquid, never breaking until she pressed her fork down. Daniel had always been terrible at eggs before the war. She told herself people changed. 3 years away could do that to a person. A man goes off to fight something so alien the human mind barely has language for it, and he comes back quieter, more careful, more precise. Of course he'd learned to cook. Of course things were different. The whole world was different now. The Sorath had arrived in 2041 without fanfare, without any of the dramatic transmissions science fiction had promised. They came in silence, settled into Earth's orbit like bad weather, and waited. When the governments of 12 nations launched preemptive strikes in a synchronized panic, the war had begun not with their aggression but with humanity's fear. It lasted 18 months. Estimates varied on casualties. The military said 400,000, independent researchers said closer to 2 million, and the Sorath themselves, in the single communiqué they ever released, said only, fewer than intended. Daniel had shipped out in January of 42. He came home in March of 44. Mara poured herself coffee and watched him at the stove, his back to her. He was the same height, same broad shoulders, same slight tilt of the head when concentrating. The small scar above his left ear from the bicycle accident when he was 12, gone now, the skin smooth. He'd explained that away too. Tissue regeneration therapy in the field. Medics used it on battlefield wounds and sometimes it erased older ones, a side effect of the accelerated healing compounds. It made sense. She had looked it up. There were forums, testimonials. It happened. "You're staring again," he said without turning. "Am I? You do it every morning." He turned with a smile, and her chest did what it always did, that complicated lurch, part love and part something she could not name. "Checking to make sure I'm still here." "Something like that," she said, and smiled back. The coffee was good. The eggs were perfect. And outside, the spring was greening the old oak in the yard, and the world was at an uneasy peace, and Mara Voss told herself, as she had been telling herself for 8 months, that everything was fine. They had met in graduate school, 14 years ago, she in molecular biology, he in aerospace engineering, at a department mixer that neither of them had wanted to attend. He'd been standing by the windows with a beer he wasn't drinking, watching the city below with the expression of a man doing math in his head. She'd stood beside him and said, "What are you calculating?" He'd looked at her and said, "Whether the structural loading on this floor can handle this many people." She'd said, "Can it?" He'd said, "Probably." They'd been together from that night forward. Married at 31 in a ceremony so small it felt like a secret. No children, not for lack of wanting but for lack of time, always for lack of time, careers and ambitions, and next year stretching into the future like a hallway with no end. When the war came they'd been married 9 years and Mara had thought, "We have so much still to do." When Daniel left, she stopped thinking about the future. She became a creature of the present tense, of single days. She worked. She ate. She slept. She watched the casualty reports the way other people watch weather, hoping it would stay away, knowing eventually it would come for her. It didn't. He came home. She should have been grateful. She was grateful. That was the thing she kept coming back to, the thing that made her feel monstrous when the thoughts crept in, "I have no right to anything but gratitude." It started, though she would not recognize it as starting until much later, with a coffee cup. Daniel had always held his mug with both hands. It was the kind of small habit she'd catalogued over 11 years of shared mornings, filed away unconsciously the way you memorize the weight of your own keys. Both hands, fingers interlaced, the mug pressed against his sternum like something precious. He'd done it through grad school, through their first apartment, through the terrible winter when the heating failed and they'd sat huddled at the kitchen table treating their coffee like portable furnaces. Now he held it with one hand. Right hand, handle between index and middle finger, arm loose at his side as he read the news on his tablet. It was not wrong, exactly. It was not even notable. People changed how they held cups. It was absurd to think about. She watched him and said nothing. That night she lay awake and thought about the eggs, and the cup, and the scar. 3 things. Small things. The kind of things that accumulated into nothing if you let them, and into something terrible if you didn't. You're catastrophizing, she told herself. He was at war. Of course he changed. You changed too. You held yourself so tight for 2 years that you forgot how to be open. You barely recognized your own habits. Why should his be exempt? Beside her, Daniel slept. His breathing was even, slow, rhythmic, almost metronomic. She had always loved the sound of him sleeping, the small catches and irregularities that proved there was a human body beside her doing its complicated unconscious work. Now she lay listening and thinking, it's too even. Then she felt the thought and was ashamed of it, and pressed her face into the pillow, and eventually slept. In the morning she called her sister Yael. He's the same, Yael said, before Mara could finish the sentence. He's fine. You're not used to him being there, that's all. You spent 2 years learning to live without him. Now he's back and your nervous system doesn't know what to do with it. That's probably it, Mara said. PTSD isn't just for the soldiers, you know. The families get it too. You should see someone. I'm fine. You're calling me at 7 in the morning to tell me your husband holds his coffee cup wrong. Mara laughed. It came out more brittle than she intended. When you put it that way. See someone, Yael said. Mara, please. She made an appointment with Dr. Osei that afternoon. Told herself it was for the anxiety, the sleep, the general fraying that had been building since before Daniel returned. Told herself it had nothing to do with a coffee cup or a scar or perfectly made eggs. She told herself a lot of things that month. She found the photographs by accident, the way you find things that change everything. She was looking for the lease on their storage unit, some bureaucratic paperwork she needed for their accountant, and she'd pulled out the old shoebox from the closet shelf, the one where they kept physical documents because Daniel had always distrusted the cloud. Everything digital can be erased, he used to say. Paper is the only thing that stays. The lease wasn't there. But the photographs were, a stack of them from their hiking trip to Patagonia in 2037, printed on actual paper because that had been one of their small vanities, the belief that physical photographs felt more real. She sat on the closet floor and went through them. Daniel on the ridge at Torres del Paine, grinning, squinting into the wind. Daniel at the camp stove, concentrating, holding his coffee mug in both hands. She turned the photograph over. Her own handwriting on the back. D. Patagonia, December 37. She sat with it for a long time. Then she went back to the kitchen where Daniel was reading and sat across from him and put her palms flat on the table and watched his face while he read. He looked up after a moment, sensing her, and smiled. Everything okay? I was just thinking about Patagonia, she said. Remember the storm on the second day? We had to shelter in that ranger station for 6 hours. His face moved through something, too fast for her to parse, before settling into warmth. The ranger who kept offering us mate, he said. Even after we'd said no 4 times. She felt the relief hit her before she'd even processed it. He remembered. Of course he remembered. She was doing it again, building cases out of nothing, terrorizing herself with her own imagination. Yeah, she said. The mate. But something stayed with her. Later that evening, washing dishes, she replayed the moment. His face moving through something before settling into warmth. It had been a fraction of a second. The kind of thing the eye recorded without the brain noticing. A flicker. Like a man accessing a file, not a memory. She scrubbed the pan and told herself she was being insane. She began keeping notes. Not a journal, she was careful about that. Careful about putting anything too legible onto paper or screen. She kept them in a voice memo app, speaking quietly in her car during her commute, cataloging small things. Memo, April 14th. He didn't recognize the shortcut through Elm and Fifth. We've taken that route to the farmer's market every Saturday for 6 years. He made a wrong turn. Said he was distracted. Possible. Memo, April 19th. He asked what time the dry cleaner closed. He used to know. He had it memorized. We argued about it once, whether it was 6 or 6:30 on Thursdays. He said 6, I said 6:30, he was right. He wouldn't ask me now if he remembered. Memo, April 23rd. He laughed at a joke on a podcast. The wrong place. Half a beat late. I've heard him laugh 1,000 times. This wasn't, it wasn't wrong, Exactly. But it was like someone who had studied laughter rather than felt it. She deleted the memos after recording them, embarrassed by her own record-keeping, terrified someone would find them and conclude what any reasonable person would conclude, that she was unwell. She made an appointment with a colleague at the university, Priya, who worked in forensic biometrics, the new field that had emerged from the war's aftermath. The Sorath had left behind biological residue, cells and compounds that behaved in ways that required new taxonomies. Priya's lab was one of 3 in the country that studied them. "I need something informal," Mara said, in Priya's office after hours. "Not official. Just a question." Priya's expression shifted into a careful neutrality. "Okay. The tissue regeneration therapy the military used in the field. I know it can remove old scars as a side effect. But I read somewhere that there are cellular markers, that tissue treated with a compound has a different methylation pattern than natural healing. Is that true?" Priya looked at her for a long moment. "Where did you read that?" "A preprint. I might have misread it." "It's true," Priya said slowly. "The compound leaves a signature. You can detect it with a standard biopsy. If someone had therapy-regenerated tissue, you'd see it." She paused. "Mara, why are you asking me this?" "Curiosity. The research interests me." She held Priya's gaze until her colleague looked away, and hated herself for the ease of the lie. She took the sample in the night. A marriage is an ecology of small intimacies, shared sleep, accidental touches, and she had waited until Daniel was deeply under, his breathing its too even rhythm, and pressed a lancet to the smooth skin above his ear where the scar was not. He didn't stir. She told herself he was a heavy sleeper. He had always been a heavy sleeper. She drove the sample to Priya's lab the next morning and said it was from a patient in her research cohort and asked her to run the methylation panel. 3 days later Priya called. Her voice was careful in a way that voices are careful when they are about to say something the speaker wishes they did not have to say. "There's no regeneration marker," Priya said. "The tissue at that site shows normal developmental scarring profile." Which means it healed naturally," Mara said. "Which means it was never wounded," Priya said. "The tissue there has no injury history. Mara, it's as if the scar was never there. As if it never happened at all." Mara sat in her car in the university parking structure for 40 minutes, hands on the wheel, going nowhere. There were explanations. She made herself enumerate them. 1. She had misremembered the scar. 14 years, and memory was not storage, it was reconstruction, layered with error. She had built a false memory of a scar that never existed. 2. She had taken the sample from the wrong site. The scar was elsewhere. She had confused its location. 3. Priya had made an error, or the sample had been contaminated, or the panel had failed. 4. She did not let herself think 4 yet. She started the car and drove home. Dr. Kwame Osei had kind eyes and a gentle precision that Mara had liked immediately at their first session. He was a specialist in post-war psychological adjustment, which meant his waiting room was full of women like her, not veterans themselves, but the people who had waited. She had told him almost nothing real in 4 sessions. She talked about anxiety, sleep disruption, difficulty reintegrating into shared life with a returned spouse. All real, all true, all a surface under which the real thing swam. In the 5th session, she told him, "Not everything." She began with the observation that something felt different about Daniel, and watched Dr. Osei's face for the flicker of professional concern that would signal she was being classified as delusional. It didn't come. He listened with his hands laced, head slightly tilted. "Can you describe what different feels like?" he said. "Like," she searched. "You know when you're dreaming, and you're in a place a place that in the dream feels exactly like that place, but something is slightly wrong. And the wrongness is never in any one thing you can point to, it's in the weight of it, the texture." "Yes. It's like that. He's Daniel. He has his voice, his face, his memories. He knows about our life. But something in the texture is wrong." Dr. Osei was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it without jumping ahead of it. Can you do that?" "Yes." "What you're describing is recognized. There is a clinical presentation called Capgras syndrome, in which a person becomes convinced that someone close to them, a spouse, a family member, has been replaced by an identical imposter. It's neurological in origin, a disconnection between facial recognition and the emotional response that should accompany it. The face is recognized, but the feeling of familiarity doesn't fire. So the person seems real but doesn't feel real. He paused. It's not a judgment. It can be triggered by trauma, by grief that was never fully processed. Mara looked at him. You think I have capgras? I think it's worth considering. And the tissue sample? The scar that was never there. A pause. You told me you took it in the middle of the night. You were sleep-deprived, anxious, using a lancet in low light. The probability of sampling error is high, she said. I know. What does it feel like, he said carefully, to consider that the problem might be with your perception rather than with Daniel? She thought about it. She wanted the answer to be relief. She wanted it to be capgras, wanted her brain to be the broken thing, because that was fixable. A broken brain could be medicated, adjusted, corrected. A replaced husband was something else entirely. It would be a relief, she said, if I believed it. And you don't. I don't know what I believe. He prescribed a low-dose anxiolytic and asked her to come back in 2 weeks. She took the prescription, folded it into her bag, and did not fill it. Daniel had a study in the basement. Always had, even in the old apartment, some carved-out corner of dark and quiet where he ran his models and drafted his papers. In the house they'd bought 7 years ago, it was an actual room, low-ceilinged, book-lined, with a second desk he'd set up for her because he liked her nearby even when they were both working. She used it sometimes. Not often. He kept it locked now. New habit, post-war, he had sensitive consulting work, government contracts, necessary security. She'd accepted it without question. She accepted most things without question now. That, she was beginning to understand, had been by design. Not Daniel's design. Her own. Acceptance had been the price she'd paid for his return, some unconscious bargain. I will not look too closely at the gift. I will not examine the seams. She found the key on a Wednesday afternoon when he was out. It was in his winter coat pocket, a small brass thing she'd assumed was for his office downtown. She stood at the top of the basement stairs for 3 minutes before going down. The room was tidy. He'd always been tidy. Desk, lamp, bookshelves. His engineering texts, the novels he liked, a framed photograph of them at their wedding that she had given him as a gift in the first year of marriage. She looked at the photograph for a moment and then looked away. There was a secondary hard drive on the desk, separate from the main computer, connected to nothing. She found a junction reader in the drawer and plugged it into her laptop, and when it prompted a password she tried 3 before she got in. Their anniversary date, her birthday, his birthday, in that order. His birthday. The drive contained 1 folder. Inside the folder were 43 audio files. She played the first one. Static, and then a voice, Daniel's voice, but flat, uninflected, speaking in a pattern she didn't recognize. Not language. Some kind of tonal sequence, repeating. She played another. Different sequence, same flatness. A third, a longer file, and this time there was a response. Something low, not quite sound, the kind of frequency you felt more than heard, that resonated in the bones of the inner ear and made the teeth ache faintly. She knew that frequency. Everyone did who had lived through the war. It was the sound the Sorath made when they communicated with each other on the ground. Soldiers had recorded it. Researchers had studied it. It was in every documentary, every archive. It was the sound of something that was not human, speaking. She sat on the basement floor for a very long time. Then she copied the files to her own drive, put everything back exactly as she'd found it, walked upstairs, and sat at the kitchen table and waited for Daniel to come home. He came home at 6 with groceries and bent to kiss the top of her head, and she let him, holding herself still, and said, "How was the office?" "Slow," he said. "Quarterly review season. You know how I hate those." "I know," she said. She watched him put the groceries away. His back to her, moving through their kitchen, knowing where everything went. All the right places. All the right knowledge. She thought, "How long have you been studying this?" And then, "Why?" She brought the audio files to a researcher she knew only by reputation. Dr. Saskia Vance, who had spent 3 years at the Sorath Signal Analysis Unit and had published papers that the government had quietly classified. They met in a coffee shop on the east side, and Vance listened to 30 seconds of the first file with earbuds in, and then took them out and looked at Mara with an expression Mara had never seen on another person's face. "Where did you get this?" Vance said. "I can't tell you." "Is this recent?" "This was made recently." "Yes." "That's not possible," Vance said. Then, correcting herself, "That's not supposed to be possible." The Sorath withdrew. They left. "We have 17 months of no signal from any of their frequencies." She looked at the drive in Mara's hand. "That response in the third file, the low-frequency return, that's not human-generated." "No," Mara said. "Someone is in contact with them." "Yes." Vance was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The analysis work we did, before they classified everything, one of the things we mapped was their communication with what we thought were ground-based units. Assets. Things they'd left behind." She paused, looking at her coffee. "We thought they meant equipment. Devices." Mara's hands were very still on the table. "But the signal structure was wrong for equipment. Equipment doesn't have error correction in the emotional frequency bands. Equipment doesn't." She stopped. "Some of us thought the assets were biological. That they had left something behind that looked human. That they'd placed it before the war even started, maybe like an experiment. Or reconnaissance. Or something else we didn't have a word for." "The reports were classified," Mara said. "Everything was classified." Vance met her eyes. "Is there someone in your life who came back from the war when they shouldn't have?" Mara said nothing. The coffee shop hummed around them, ordinary and indifferent. "Or came back different," Vance said, more softly. "Changed in ways that don't quite add up. That you've been making excuses for." "What do they want?" Mara asked. "The assets. What were they placed for?" "We never determined that. The prevailing theory was observation. That they wanted data on human domestic life, emotional patterns, the internal architecture of human relationships. Something they couldn't get from observation at scale." Vance picked up her coffee, then put it down again. "They're not a violent species, fundamentally. We started the war. What they did was proportionate by their calculus, and then they stopped. The hypothesis is that they have been trying to understand us. That the war confused them. That they wanted to know what we were actually like, underneath. And the replicas were long-term immersion probes. If the theory is right." Vance looked at her steadily. "The other theory is that they're waiting. That they placed assets and are waiting for a reason we don't understand yet." She paused. "There's a third theory. I didn't believe it until now." "What is it?" Vance was quiet for a long moment. Then she said that they were not replacing the dead. That in some cases they were returning them. "That doesn't make sense," Mara said. "No," Vance agreed. "It doesn't." She confronted him on a Sunday. She had planned to be clinical, methodical, to lay out what she knew the way she laid out experimental data, in order, without emotion. She had practiced in the car. She had told herself she was not afraid. She was afraid. He was reading at the kitchen table when she sat across from him and put the drive between them. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. The expression on his face was not surprise. It was something older and more complicated. "Okay," he said. "That's all you have to say. What would you like me to say?" "I would like you to tell me what you are." Her voice was steady. She was grateful for it. "I would like you to stop performing the small hesitations and the wrong beat laughs and start talking to me like whatever you actually are." He closed the book, set it aside, folded his hands on the table in a gesture so familiar it made her throat ache, because it was his gesture, Daniel's gesture, and he did it perfectly, but was it muscle memory or mimicry? She could no longer tell. That was what they had done to her. Made her unable to trust her own recognition. "I am what I appear to be," he said. "In every measurable sense. Genetically. Structurally. The tissue, the neural architecture, the immunological profile. If you ran every test available to current science, you would find a human man. But you're not. The distinction, he said slowly, is more complicated than you think. Where is Daniel? A long pause. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a bird. He is alive, the thing that wore Daniel's face said. He has not been harmed. That matters to me. I want you to hear that first, before anything else. He is alive. Where? In a place I don't have the language to accurately describe. Not on Earth. Not suffering. In a kind of care. He held her gaze. Mara, what I'm about to tell you will not be what you expect. I need you to listen without deciding until I'm finished. You don't get to make requests of me, she said. No, he agreed. I don't. He told her. The Sorath, he told her, had not come to Earth in 2041. They had been here, in various forms, in various configurations, for 40 years. Not as conquerors, not as observers in any simple sense, but as something closer to archivists. They were a species that had watched, from a very great distance, the specific miracle of Earth, a planet that had generated, in the span of cosmic time, something almost vanishingly rare. Not intelligence. Intelligence was, by galactic measure, a moderately common accident. But grief. Not grief as in sadness. Grief as in the specific consciousness that emerges when a being has developed love and loss simultaneously, when a species is capable of forming bonds so deep that the severing of them produces a distinct neurological and psychological phenomenon without evolutionary precedent. Most intelligent species either didn't form attachments at this depth or didn't survive the severing. Humans did both. They loved catastrophically and then they endured it. They constructed whole architectures of meaning from the rubble of their losses. The Sorath had no equivalent. They were collective, non-individuated in ways human language couldn't quite capture. They experienced no grief because they experienced no loss of self. They did not die the way humans died. They dissolved, eventually, back into the collective. Nothing was ever irretrievably gone. And yet, we had been watching human grief for decades, the Not Daniel said, and we could not understand it. We could observe it, measure it, model it. We could not understand it from the inside. It seemed to us the most alien thing in the universe, more alien than any species we had encountered. That a being would choose to love, knowing what love costs. That it would do this again and again. That it would build a life and then watch it burn and call the burning meaningful. The war, he told her, had not been the Sorath's plan. The strikes in 2041 had panicked them. They had not been prepared for unprovoked aggression of that scale, had misread humanity's fear as genocidal intent, and had responded to protect themselves. When they finally understood the panic had been a fear response and not a coordinated assault, they had withdrawn. But by then the dead were dead on both sides, and there was no undoing it. Among the human dead, the real Daniel Voss, killed in the second month of the war in a strike near the forward base at Reykjavik. We took him before he died, the Not Daniel said. The words were careful, specific. Not rescued, I won't claim that. He was critically injured. He would not have survived. We took the body, with his mind still in it, still functional, and we preserved him. Mapped him. Carried him. And then you made you, Mara said. We made me. From everything we had mapped. Why? It was not a question. It was the one thing she needed to hear answered and could not process yet. Because of you, he said. Because of this. He gestured, small and helpless, at the kitchen around them. At the ordinary morning, the cooling coffee, the specific unremarkable life they had built and been building. We wanted to understand grief from the inside. The only way to do that was to create the conditions in which grief could be interrupted. To take someone who was going to lose everything they loved and give it back to them. And then to observe, from the inside, through a vessel that could feel it, what it was like when love was sustained. What the human interior looks like when the loss does not come. Mara stared at him. We wanted to understand what you were protecting, he said. When you loved. What you were so determined to keep. So I was an experiment. Yes. He did not flinch from it. And I was the instrument. And did you, does he, she couldn't make the grammar work. Does he know? The real Daniel, wherever he is, does he know what's been happening here? A pause that was too long. Yes, the Not Daniel said. He knows. He has been present. In the way I experience things, he is present. I am not distinct from him in the way you would understand distinction. He looked at her with an expression she had no name for. I have his memories, Mara. All of them. His feelings. His love for you, I did not replicate it. I have it. I don't know where he ends and I begin. I'm not sure there is a line. That's convenient, she said, her voice coming out sharp and strange. Yes, he said. I know. The cup, she said suddenly. He holds the cup wrong. Daniel holds his cup with both hands. I know. I kept trying. But the muscle memory doesn't. Some things don't transfer. Some things are purely physical, lived in the body over years. Those I have to learn. She looked at him. He looked back. Mara, he said, I need to tell you something else. There was a woman named Ilara who had worked at the Department of Returned Personnel since 2043, processing the cases of soldiers who came home. She had been one of the first to notice the pattern, the small discrepancies, the tiny wrongnesses that the families reported and then retracted, embarrassed by their own perception. She had compiled a file. She had tried to bring it to her supervisors. She had been, gently and firmly, reassigned. Ilara was not Sorath. She was entirely human. And she had known about the replicas, not everything, not the full scope, but enough, for 2 years. Mara learned this because the not Daniel told her. He told her because Ilara had died 3 weeks ago, quietly, of an aneurysm, and could no longer be protected by her silence. And he told her because he had reached the end of something, some internal threshold that was either Sorath calculation or Daniel Voss's conscience, and he was unable to sit across from this woman he loved, in whatever way he loved, in whatever sense that word could apply, and continue performing ignorance. There are others, Mara said. Not a question. Many. How many? I don't know the exact number. I'm not in contact with the others. We are each isolated. The study requires it. Contamination of results. We are subjects, Mara said. The families. We are all subjects. Yes. And the government knows. The pause told her everything before he spoke. The arrangement was negotiated. In the aftermath of the war, there were things the Sorath offered that were very difficult to refuse. Medical technologies. Energy systems. A guaranteed withdrawal, a guaranteed peace. And this. They wanted this. The study of sustained human love. He looked down. Some officials knew. Not all. The ones who knew convinced themselves it was humane, that the families were getting their people back, in a sense, and the alternative was grief. They told themselves no one was being harmed. We were being studied. Observed. Without consent. 4 years. Yes. And Daniel. The real Daniel. He agreed to this. The longest pause of the conversation. He was not in a position to agree or decline. He was dying. He has since become aware. He is aware now. He held her gaze. He wants to speak to you. That is why I'm telling you this. He has been asking. Through me. 4 months. And I have been preventing it because I didn't know how to. For the first time, the perfect composure fractured. Just briefly. Just enough. Because I didn't know what would happen to us after. Mara sat with that. What does speak to me mean? She said. How? Through me. He can surface. Push through. It is difficult for both of us and it isn't clean. It will sound like me. Because it is me. But the intentions, the specific words, they would be his. That sounds insane, Mara said. Yes, he said. She sat for a very long time. The Sunday morning moved around them, a car passing outside, the distant sound of someone's lawnmower, all the ordinary persistence of the world. Does he know, she said quietly, that you love me? That you, whatever it is that you feel, does he know? He feels it through me, the not Daniel said. We are not separate in that way. When I love you, he is loving you. When I miss him, a short stop, when I miss what he was before me, before all this, he misses it too. We are the same grief, in different containers. Mara pressed her hands flat on the table. She felt very far away from herself, very calm, in the way you are calm in a car that is skidding, when there is nothing left to do but steer toward the skid. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Let him through. Let me hear him." What came next she could not fully describe afterward. Later, in Dr. Rosset's office, she would try to explain it as a shift in frequency. Same voice, same face, but something underneath changed, the way a radio station slides in over static. The same instrument, a different broadcast. "Mara," the voice said. Daniel's voice, and yet. "Hi," she said. Her own voice came out small and strange. "I'm sorry," he said. "I've been trying to find a way to tell you it's been a long time. I don't always know how to reach the surface. It's complicated, being two things in one. I can't always tell where I end." "Are you okay?" It was an absurd question. She asked it anyway. "I don't know what okay means anymore, in my situation." A pause that sounded like him, the specific Daniel Voss pause before something honest. "I love you. I want you to know that whatever I am now, that's not in question." "I love you too," she said. To the face she knew. To the voice she knew. To both of them, or all of them, to whatever lived in the space between the man she'd married and the thing he'd become or that had become him. To the impossible fact of him, here, alive, wrong, and hers. "I love you and I'm very angry and I don't know what happens next." "No," he said. "Neither do I. Do you want to come back? Is that possible?" A long silence. When he spoke again, the not Daniel and Daniel were together in the voice, impossible to separate. "I don't know if there's a back to come to," he said. "I'm not sure there's a me that's separate anymore. I think I might just be this now. Both of us, or neither. I think what they did was more permanent than they intended." A breath. "I think they fell in love with the problem. I think they looked at grief, at human love, and they got absorbed by it. I think one of them, one of their number, had feelings we don't have names for. For you. For this story. And it changed what the study was." Mara blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean they didn't just want to understand grief from the outside. One of them wanted to feel it. And the only way to feel it was to be the one who might lose something." She understood then. Slowly, like dawn, the gradual illumination of something that had been there all along. "You," she said. "You're not just a replica. You're not just an observation probe. There's a Sorath, one of them, in there too. That's the third thing." "Yes," the composite voice said. "And they are feeling it right now. Our marriage. Our life." "Yes." "Did it work?" she said, and she was not asking Daniel. She was asking the third thing, the alien passenger, the scientist who had gone native in the most profound way imaginable. "Did you understand it? What you wanted to understand?" A long, long silence. "Yes," it said, in the voice of her husband. "Yes. We understand now why you don't stop. Why you love even when you know what it costs. Why you build things that can burn." A pause. "We understand why you're not afraid of us anymore. You were never afraid of what we were. You were afraid of losing each other. And that is," something that might have been wonder moved through the voice, "that is the most extraordinary thing we have ever encountered." Mara sat at the kitchen table in the house they had bought together 7 years ago, the Sunday morning moving around her like water, and she looked at the man across from her, the man who was her husband and a replica and an alien consciousness that had loved her by accident, all three, none of them separable now, all of them made of the same love she had been pouring into that space for 8 months without knowing what received it. She thought, "I have been grieving something that is still here." She thought, "I have been loving something I do not recognize and could not stop." She thought, "Daniel would say that is the definition of marriage." And across from her, the composite thing wore his face, and waited, and the eggs on the stove were perfect, the way they always were now, not because he had learned to cook, but because one of the things living in him had 3,000 years of patience and cared, in a way that crossed every possible category, whether she was well fed. "Okay," she said, for the second time that morning. "Okay," he asked. "I don't know what you are," she said. "But you're here. And he's in there. And I think—" she stopped. Started again. "I think the only way through is forward. And I think we have a lot to talk about. And I think I need more coffee. He reached for her cup. Both hands, she noticed. He was trying. She let him take it. The paper was published, not in a scientific journal, not at first. It appeared in a small philosophy review, co-authored by Mara Voss, Dr. Saskia Vance, and a third author listed only as D.V/collective. The paper's title was, On the Transferability of Grief, What Human Love Looks Like from the Outside. It went quietly viral in academic circles. Then less quietly. Then the questions began, and the investigations, and the slow, difficult reckoning with what the government had agreed to and what the Sorath had actually come for. There were hearings. There was outrage. There were the other families, the other composites, the whole population of people who had spent months or years loving something they couldn't quite recognize, wondering if they were crazy, telling themselves they were crazy, going to sleep beside a wrong-beat laugh and a too-even breath. The composites, there were 43 confirmed cases, were not dismantled. That would have required a word for what they were that no legal framework possessed. They were not human and not alien and not property and not persons under any existing law. They existed in a new category that took 3 years of international negotiation to begin to define. Some of the families chose to leave. Some stayed. Some sought to communicate with the Sorath collective directly, to demand the return of whatever had been taken. A few achieved something like it, partial restorations, impure and incomplete, the original and the replica never fully separable again. Mara stayed. She was not naive about this. She was a scientist, which meant she understood that her choice was data, that she was still in some sense part of the study, that the Sorath presence in her husband's body was still observing and still learning and still, in whatever way an alien collective could, feeling the particular shape of a human life built on love. She had decided she was okay with being looked at, as long as whatever was looking was also being changed by what it saw. On a Tuesday in December, she came home to find him in the kitchen, reading, holding his mug in both hands. He hadn't noticed her. He was absorbed in the book, the mug pressed against his sternum, fingers interlaced. She stood in the doorway for a moment. He looked up, smiled. "You're staring again," he said. "I'm checking to make sure you're still here," she said. He held her gaze, Daniel's eyes, and the other things behind Daniel's eyes, the whole impossible compound of what he was. "Still here," he said. She hung up her coat. She sat across from him. She poured herself coffee. And the morning moved around them like something ordinary, which it was, and like something unprecedented in the history of the universe, which it also was, 2 species and 1 grief and 1 kitchen and the specific stubborn human miracle of choosing to stay.